Thanks for joining us on the Cultured Meat and Future Food Show. My name is Alex, and I'll be your host for this episode. We're excited to have Lejjy Gafour, the CEO of Cult Food Science, on the show. Lejjy is a self-taught entrepreneur and an experienced company operator who made his start creating opportunities at the young age of 14. He's been working, leading, and building businesses ever since. We talk about his background, his founding story of Future Fields, and what Cult Food Science is today. Lejjy, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Lejjy, you've been in the cultivated meat industry for quite some time. Tell us a little bit about your background and maybe even before you got into the space.
Yes. Oh gosh, this is the long question. Yes, I've been in the space for a while, officially since around 2015. I was one of the co-founders of Future Fields. Back then, when my co-founders and I started the company, there was not a lot of players in this space. And we made the decision to form the company way back at an earlier New Harvest conference. But backing it up a bit, on my own background, I have a very, I will say, eclectic background. I've had over 30 jobs. I've been everything from a drywaller to a health researcher to a designer. I worked in research computing, enterprise software. I was an enterprise architect for a while as well. A lot of stuff on computing, hardware, startups, had retail businesses. And my massive amount of random jobs that I've had throughout my life was a kind of result of my deeper background. I actually grew up on a farm here in southern Canada in pretty deep poverty. So I had my hands in the dirt, so to speak, with actual on the ground farming. And it was interesting because I never imagined that I would get back into food in such a long roundabout way. Because honestly, I hated it so much living on a farm. It was the work was hard, and when you couldn't grow enough food and make things work out in the middle of nowhere, it was challenging, especially in the winter. So a lot of that experience shaped how I feel about food on things like food security is an easy example, which is a common term that gets thrown around, especially at conferences, but it's that term loses the sensation of the reality of literally not being able to eat and starving, which if you go through that legitimately is something that never really leaves you. So that sense has carried me through into where I'm at today, because you can never really escape it. And even then, even though I grew up quite poor, had multiple weeks of not having food, living on a farm, I was still lucky compared to many others. And the food problems I feel are hidden for a lot of people in North America. And I'm always worried it's going to get worse, hence what I'm doing now. But I had no formal training, so to speak. A lot of the stuff was self-taught. And fast forwarding to starting getting in the cultured meat space, I had discovered it from a 3M researcher quite a while ago when he was working on tissue engineering here at the University of Alberta in Canada. And I thought it was quite interesting. So when the opportunity really came up to learn things from New Harvest and go to the conference, I jumped at the chance and made the call with my co-founders to start a first company there because we saw there was really a blank slate of players, especially in Canada. So we were one of the first operating companies in Canada. And I exited here just at the end of 2021. Found myself fortunate enough to pick up a role at Cult Food Science, where I'm at today, focused on exclusively the cell-based space for investment and new company development. A lot of stuff in there. So feel free to ask any questions or clarifications on that.
No, absolutely. That's definitely quite a story. And I would say, you're right. You definitely did come full circle, starting in food and now you are in food. One question that comes up is, Canada does have very long winters. And so, what kind of farm was it? Was it a vegetable farm? Did you have animals on the farm? What kind of farm was it?
You'll have to forgive the software terms. At the start, it was a full stack farm, I would say. But this is around like the late 80s, early 90s, where it really started to not become viable to just have like a, I don't want to say subsistence, but the ideal farm that people kind of have in their head for what a small farm, I will say, used to be, where you could have like cattle and pigs and chickens and grow wheat and have a vegetable garden. We had all these things at a period of time, but each one of them really stopped being viable. And eventually we were just left with just pretty big gardens to grow what we could. So it was a mixed farm. There's wheat farming at one point, but a lot of that stuff really had to start to die off as the years grew on and stuff got more difficult till I eventually moved away.
And some of those other jobs or roles that you had, was that all in Canada?
Yes, yeah. I've lived in Canada for all my life. Been fortunate enough to travel around, but yeah, 90% of my working experience has been based here in Canada overall, with a lot of it focused on computing and hardware.
So I want to focus the conversation mostly on cult food science, but I do want to kind of hear how creating Future Fields first came about. What was the process of kind of getting together with the co-founders and saying, "Hey, let's do this thing"?
It was, I would say, a matter of inspiration and risk taking. Both my co-founders at the time very skilled in their own domains, and between the three of us, we had each one of a unique skill set that the other person did not have at the time, that really made a complete package. The majority of my experience is on the business and computing side, and I didn't have the bio side, where other co-founders had that. So we both had different motivations for why we wanted to start it, but ultimately we saw the potential of what this technology could have, which is really changing and shifting how agriculture is seen, how products are produced, and what it could mean for the future in light of climate change more than anything. Even back then, all three of us were quite motivated to try to actually make a difference somehow with the things that we knew, and made the decision to take the risk. But we had made the call before everything was really, really official, to go to one of the earlier New Harvest conferences. And after we saw the speakers and the presenters there, it was pretty clear to us that there was still a chance and an open field to really get involved in this. So after that, we formalized everything and tried our first stab at making a chicken nugget, which was really expensive. Iterated through eventually to what Future Fields is today, which is sustainable recombinant protein production, which originally formed around it being a solution to the cost problem of growth media and growth factors. So it's evolved quite a bit to where it is today. A lot of learnings in that, and a lot of steps forward, but definitely it's along that theme where biotechnology is never just one thing, and then it crosses over into so many different domains.
I've been hearing a lot of references to the New Harvest Conference. Of course, we just met a couple months ago in person at the 2022 New Harvest Conference. I just got off a call with Josh March, and he also said that he kind of got into the field through a New Harvest Conference. I wanted to ask, which year was it that you and the other Future Fields co-founders first went to the New Harvest Conference?
I believe it was the 2015 conference in New York.
Wow. Okay, so definitely one of the earlier ones.
Yeah, I believe it was the second or third one. I should probably know this, but it was in the Red Hook in New York. that we attended that conference. Yeah.
Cool. And so Future Fields kind of went on to raise money, and now they're building out their product line. Were you kind of the founding CEO?
I originally started focused on that business role, yeah, to carry things forward, given my experience to really man moving a lot of that side of it. I previously in the past had a lot of experience in service design and sales from different domains. So it's really about bringing that together, especially from the, I'll say, enterprise sales side, to get a lot of that stuff moving originally.
And as you decided to transition to cult, when did you kind of make the decision, you know what, Future Fields is at a good place for me to kind of transition? What was that like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's quite, I will say, for those listening who maybe have not went through it or are thinking about starting a startup right now, quite common and normal to make the switch in, I will say, startup life. That everything was moving along, quite a bit of opportunity. I'd been there for some time, so it was really a active choice to be able to move forward, especially to help support the ecosystem more broadly. Because one thing when you're in the game of VC investment and you're a fast moving startup, you really do need to focus on your customers and your product. And that's it. So the ecosystem side of it was really important to me, which is definitely hard to spend time on because you don't have time for anything either way when your customer and product is ultimately the core thing you have to be concerned about in that type of arrangement. So being able to move forward to be able to focus with a wider lens on the industry as a whole was a part of it as well. Yes.
Cool. And I think that's kind of like a fresh way to transition into, I guess, what is cult, and how did you first get introduced into cult food science?
Yeah. The final answer is that so Call Food Science is a first of its kind platform in North America, being publicly traded, focused on, we say, cell based foods because for a lot of people, I will say outside of our industry, the lines are very, very blurry. And I mean, really, it is between like what's precision fermentation, what's cell ag, what's this and what's that. So we settled on cell based as kind of a encompassing term for those that might be less familiar who are looking at us. And we invest on a global scale. So we have investments in North America, South Africa, Singapore, and beyond in the cell based space. And we also are focused on developing our own IP and spinning up companies where we see white space as well. So we had recently announced a partnership with New Lab based out of New York, which is a venture studio, which really focuses on new co-development to work together on creating new cellular agriculture companies as a joint project, which you will be hearing more about in the coming months. And we look at both the themes we are seeing positive and negative from our portfolio companies and within the commodities space. So, where we foresee there being an issue in the future with a particular, let's say, ingredient, whether that might be due to climate change or other issues with availability, or perhaps even practices of how a particular commodity or material is created, we'll specifically look for companies that fulfill that need to round out our investments. And if we can't find it, we'll find a way to develop the IP ourselves, where it is symbiotic with the rest of our investments. And we look, you see that in our current portfolio where we have investments kind of across the chain of products, everything from bioreactors to consumer products, so that there can be a mutual benefit between the companies as well to really help things kick off.
Great. And I think, I actually learned a lot about what Cult does beyond just kind of having this investment portfolio of companies. And very interesting to see that Cult is also developing, new IPs as well. for me and maybe some audience members that are not too familiar with cult, we saw that kind of cult came to existence. Very nice branding, I would say, and
Yeah.
also started making some serious plays right away. And so, tell us a little bit about how Cult Food Science is structured as like an investment vehicle on I believe it's on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and then also maybe how. And I know this might be before you joined, but how it was founded and maybe who either the people or organizations that did start it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that is something that is our structure is definitely unique to Canada and a few other companies on the planet where we are publicly traded. We are available on different stock exchanges in North America and in the UK as well. You can find us under Cult and then Cult F in some cases. And the original founding team, yes, they did form before I joined, was made up of, I would say, old school or OG investors in different industries. They had seen what had happened with what are now standard plant based offerings, such as Impossible and Beyond. And they were around for a lot of ag tech investments and robotics investments kind of in that vertical. And they had watched what had happened with plant proteins, and they see the same thing happening with cellular agriculture. And the biggest thing that they had mentioned to me is that they actually had just waited too long to really get involved on the plant-based side before it took off. They had saw the indicators, they knew the people, they saw us getting popular, but of course at the time, way back in the day, it was still like high risk. It's the same things that we're hearing about Celag in some cases today. People are like, "Oh, are people going to eat this? Is it going to be able to scale?" So on and so forth. But given to where we're at today in comparison, it's pretty hard to argue that some of those offerings haven't been really successful. So they saw the same thing happening with the cell based space. It was a conscious decision to get in that early to be able to put together this offering a portfolio in the cell based space and to be able to put forward an offering for people that want to get involved in it or want to invest in it who generally can't. So if you want to go invest in a startup, you generally have to be a accredited investor for those who might not be familiar with that. And it's quite a bit of money to qualify as that. So it's not exactly common. But I actually get emails fairly regularly from just totally random people who will send me an email being like, "Hey, this is exactly the type of companies that I want to be able to put in my own personal portfolio, even if it's a small amount." We're giving people the option and access to add cell based foods to the portfolio early on, even though it is still risky to be able to help support the change that they want to see in food systems in the future. And that everyday people think about this stuff and it's often inaccessible for them to support it. So that was another motivation for making Cult happen.
Very cool. And I think offering an opportunity to kind of let not just professional investors or, like you said, accredited investors get involved is a really good opportunity. The founders of Cult or these OG finance and investor folks, do they have other vehicles similar to Cult, maybe in different industries?
They did. Yeah, I apologize because some of it I'll have to be a little bit purposely vague, but yeah, they've done it before in the past, and they are definitely long-standing investors. So multiple of them have quite familiar with the capital or public markets, and generally taking companies all the way from startup to IPO over the last few decades. So they had quite a number of investments in different industries where they saw opportunities come up over the last 10 to 20 years to get to where they are today. And it's quite a diverse group. Everyone's based in Canada, but it's yeah, they had a long history of, I will say, traditional ag tech investments as well that worked out well for them.
You've been in the industry for some time, wearing many different hats within the industry. As like we stand today, what do you think is really missing, or what do you think is coming up next?
There's definitely some things that are emerging, which are interesting, which I feel is really about a maturity curve of the industry overall, which I see as a good thing. So I definitely foresee that there will be some regulatory approvals relatively soon, and how those play out will be super important. And I know sometimes people like to pick on the scale of some of these early releases, but I always like to compare it to other industries where this cycle of introduction and adoption generally does start at a small scale. And it's really the quality of those first product introductions and how all that plays out that can really shape the future of future offerings and companies really starting to hit that full scale that people talk about. It's interesting too, because scale, I feel, for food is hard to talk about in kind of like a traditional lens when you talk about startup scaling, because literally everyone on the planet needs to eat. So it is less concrete compared to something like a single purpose app, where you can do a lot of top down or bottom up calculations, whatever you want. There's still a single value proposition in something like an app that gives you more constraints to understand what adoption might look like and how it might be going. But because everyone needs to eat, and it is much, much more than utility in many cases, with cultural aspects and everything else that goes with food, that these early releases over the next year, 2 years will be super important. Another pattern, which is good, is the increase of B2B companies. So, I mean, when the industry first started, you had to be vertically integrated. So you had to do everything yourself because there just literally wasn't anywhere to go to. Which, of course, if you can figure that out, has a lot of advantages for being able to own the space, your processes, and make a lot of money while you're doing it. But it is not easy. So the increase of B2B companies in the space is good, because what I see happening is there's still like one to two new companies that pop up every month. I wouldn't be surprised if that started to increase after some of the first product releases and regulatory approvals started to really come through in North America. But when there's more B2B firms, a new company can look at those firms and actually actively make a choice to be like, hey, now we actually don't have to do this one particular part because we can depend on another company that's specialized in it to accelerate their growth. So it allows them to perhaps what may have been the same steps for multiple companies for the first 3 or 4 years, even as it was 5 years ago, that everyone had to go through, that then new companies don't have to do that. And that is an accelerant in its own. And that's not to say that every B2B or vertically integrated company will be successful. It's just that that proliferation of different ideas, different approaches, and accessibility globally for the technologies and approaches will create a steady climb towards that quote unquote scale that we're all aiming for. Another interesting item is even on the investment side for how investing can work and what that might look like with this being, I'll say, hard tech with longer timelines. You definitely can't necessarily invest in a company and treat it like you might a portfolio of software companies. There are costs to scaling, and the growth curve can be different. But at the same time, once that growth curve is achieved, it can be more resilient and sustainable. But you definitely can't treat biotech as you might treat software. And that is something that I do see changing, is that there's more and more investors, sorry, that are coming in that may be coming from a different space. And some of them may have treated it like other industries. They're expecting a particular growth curve or particular growth speed without the familiarity of what it takes to scale something physical. And that is changing. I'm having more and more investors that want to get involved in the space come forward to us that will say outright, I am not familiar with this. I don't have someone that could do due diligence on it. Can you help me invest in this? And they're totally left field in like things like real estate. But there's more and more interest picking up from those that are less familiar, which I believe is also good for the industry, which we'll see more of with those product releases.
Yeah, definitely a good sign for the industry. And going off your point of seeing more B2B players made me think of the reference you made to the plant-based companies. And I guess when you're looking at cell-based, barrier to entry is higher, but these new companies that are emerging, they're kind of different category. Maybe they're stemming off from other types of biotech or maybe even medical. So it is exciting to see that there's going to be a lot more and new companies come into play. I wanted to ask about New Harvest and the collaboration you had with New Harvest regarding open cell ag. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. So open cell ag is really motivation on the ecosystem side about being able to make as many materials, techniques, and information as available as possible to everyone in the space and beyond. And that really does mean everything. No matter how many times I do something or meet with someone or talk with something, it is always a mistake to assume that there is such a thing as something that is too basic. So the goal really is to be able to provide information all the way from the most beginning things like at a high level, what might you need to fundraise functionally as a new startup, to resources for people that are looking to get involved in the space as a scientist of what questions they need to ask if they're switching for a different domain, to more complex initiatives such as trying to build out a cell bank, which is a very long project and very expensive to be able to provide those first starting materials for new companies in an affordable way without predatory contracts, in an accessible way with strong backing information about those materials. And this really is about both accelerating the ecosystem as a whole on one hand, but then also attempting to make it more equitable across the board. You will often still see new companies, especially if they started somewhere else. So let's say outside of North America, outside where it's like a major city, and maybe somebody found this idea and they were really into it. They know how to do it and they just started a company. There's a very high chance that they will repeat the first 3 years that all these other companies of space may have already went through, but there's no way for them to know that. And there's no way for them to necessarily get that information either, so that they don't have to go through the same steps. If I had companies come towards us that are already seem like they're 2 years ahead, that's perfect for me on the investment side. And then at the same time, it is really about maximizing resources that people can get to make this a reality. You can't win, I think, in any new, really technical space or with the industry in general without being able to include as many people, disciplines, and ideas as possible. And making that open is really about what Open Celag is all about.
Great. I love it. And I think you do hear about the companies getting started where even after it takes time for them to acquire equipment, which can be a challenge within itself, some of that basic kind of research takes a while and a lot of people ends up repeating doing the same thing. So I think this is a great initiative. This has been great. You could learn more about cult food science at www.cultfoodscience.com. You can get in touch with Lejjy on LinkedIn. Lejjy, do you have any last insights for our listeners today?
I would say that if anyone is listening and they're not involved in the space, now is the perfect time to do it. I will say, hype cycle has not really kicked off yet. So now is the perfect time to join while it's still early. And then if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me and happy to answer.
Excellent. Lejjy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
This is your host, Alex, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
This program was produced by H Media. See you soon.